In the name of God the Merciful, the Beneficent, thanks be to God the Almighty. God's peace and prayers be upon Muhammad, the balm of hearts and the healer of bodies, the light by which we're made to see, and upon his family and companions. May God be pleased with them all. I greet you all in the name of Islam, so peace and God's blessings be upon you, and welcome to another installment of this program, Revolution of Man. Each episode we study one exemplar, someone who rebels against something that they would easily go along with. This person does not opt to stay on the same path as his ancestors before him, and sometimes decides to rebel against his own self. It begins within one person, then proceeds to change life for others. As the Almighty says, "Lo, Allah changeth not the condition of a folk until they first change that which is in their hearts." When one rises up against his own nature and sometimes against his own traditions and habits, against bad habits originating within him, or against a social pattern which he follows that is wrong, then the nation can improve. Today we're discussing a topic which might be a little surprising. Today we discuss someone who revolts against vanity or conceit, which might lead one astray. Vanity that comes from within human nature. If one is vain, then they've reached a point where or achieved something that made them vain. Perhaps they gained a certain amount of knowledge or a certain amount of wealth, or perhaps status and its attendant pride. He eventually reaches a point where he himself becomes a vain person. Imagine a person who monitors his own behavior and gauges his morality. And when he found out that he had become vain, or that he was on the threshold of becoming thus, he rebelled against himself and rid himself of all that made him that way. Today I'll begin the story of our exemplar, and we'll get to the name later. There once was a poor man who had a small shop, and he had 2 sons. When death came near, he asked one of his friends to take care of them both, and it was his life's wish that they would learn the art of calligraphy. He didn't want them to be scientists or linguists or even doctors. He only wanted them to learn calligraphy. When he died, his friend took care of the sons, spending what little money he had on them until he ran out. So he told the boys, "I'm afraid I've got nothing left. What your father gave me, I spent on you. And I've been spending my own money to care for you, and now I've run out." So what would they do for food and drink? So he told them that they would go to school, pretending to learn, and eat with the students there. Back then, Muslims would pay lots of money to send their children to learn, because through education does the nation rise and improve. A nation will never prosper if everyone hoards their money and uses it only within their house to provide food, shelter and clothing, uncaring for their children's futures. That nation will not advance. Education is the key. And so people long ago used to make schools, awqaf, charities, and pay to keep children learning. And so the man told the 2 boys that they should go to school, not to learn, but rather to eat with the students from the food that was served every day. That's why he later said that he sought learning only for the sake of feeding himself, to survive, to get a crust of bread. We sought knowledge, not for the sake of God, but it refused to be otherwise. The surprise came when these 2 lost and hungry orphan little boys became prodigies of the Muslim nation, and all eyes turned to them and wanted to learn from them. This man was born in Tus, moved to Gurgan, and then back to Tus. One day, while on the road, some highwaymen stopped him. They were the type of bandits that waylaid travellers and took their money, their food, their drink, their possessions and their luggage. When they found he had nothing, they took his books. So he took a risk and went to the leader of the bandits and began begging him and pleading with the man to give him back his books, which were his only possessions in the world. He had no money or position or power, nor was he the carrier of luggage or clothing. He begged to have his books back, So the leader said something interesting. He said, "How can you claim to have learned anything from them when now you don't have them anymore? You have lost everything. So you've lost all your knowledge now that we've taken your books." And so he was wrapped in thought. He said, "I swear it was God that made him say that. God made him say that so that I would become more aware of myself." And so he went back and spent 3 years doing nothing but reading and memorizing and reading. He learned every basic text without which a scholar is no scholar, until he became famous and the Muslim world learned his name, and he became a beacon of knowledge, and he's still remembered today. Maybe he will be an example to you. His name is Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Ghazali. May God be pleased with him. He founded the book seeking knowledge, and his name became known among the Muslims, so much that the Caliph Nizam al-Mulk summoned him to the empire's capital in Baghdad, and there he founded for him a university and gave him its keys so that he would begin teaching there. This was called the Nizamiya School, after the Caliph, and it's one of the most renowned in the world. He was given a position and respect and money. Imagine, all from a little boy who was hungry and had nobody to take care of him, who went to school seeking not an education, but food to eat. This lost and hungry orphan boy became the head of the school of Nizam al-Mulk. He became the dean of the largest and most famous and most prestigious university of its time in the whole wide world. He was swimming in gifts and money so that he would recruit scholars like himself, and so that he would attract students to teach and benefit, and so that he would grant scholarships and stipends to students, so that he would feed and put up these students who would focus on their learning, so that he would provide them with travel expenses and leisure activities, and provide them with translations of scientific texts from anywhere. Imagine that. He was now at a point where he is more powerful than a minister. He's given control of a university. He can spend it on whatever he wishes. Remember what he was and what he became. When Imam al-Ghazali's entourage would travel, it would be surrounded by a complement of 1,000 students, all of them waiting to hear what words of wisdom he would speak, so they would write it down. His words were written down in gold water because of their value. This lost orphan boy, whose father only left him a pittance that would be spent on him to teach him only calligraphy, grew up to be the dean of the largest and most important Islamic university of that era, the school of Nizam al-Mulk, the Nizamiya School of Baghdad. Imagine that sort of charity and goodwill it received to cover its expenditure and its running costs. Think how much God blesses those who seek knowledge. Think how lucky those are who seek knowledge and learning, and how these can lift up an entire nation into something more and into something better. With the knowledge of his faith and his holy book, God blesses people like he blessed that young lost orphan boy without a thing to his name, till he became on a par with the Caliph himself. Incidentally, the Nizamiya school had more than 100,000 students, all of whom were clothed and fed and housed, all at the expense of the Muslims, so that the Muslim nation and the Muslim people would rise and ascend. When they spent their money on these students, it wasn't to produce scholars and scientists and men of learning. I say to you youngsters, our Ummah dedicated part of its budget solely for the education of young people and for scientific research, and to schools, to the teaching of science, and all of this to give learning its due share. Our nation was then ascending higher and higher and higher at that time. Look where our money goes today. On holidays, vacations, mobile phones, and trivial things. I'm not saying this is a waste, but I think it's a shame that these are our main concerns, while education is our last priority. Let's continue the life story of Imam al-Ghazali and how he rebelled against his own pride and vanity, and when we come back after the break, we'll have more. Stay tuned. Welcome back once again to the program, The Revolution of Man, and today's subject, the renowned Muslim scholar Imam al-Ghazali, who confronted his own vanity. He started off as someone who had nothing, yet became the head of the most impressive university in the world in those days. A man whose position afforded him untold resources, riches, status and veneration amongst his students. But Imam al-Ghazali had a very interesting trait that is worth noting. He used to monitor his own behaviour. He went from being destitute to someone whose entourage included more than 1,000 students. And so he began to feel vain, and that worried him. So he took a sabbatical and went on Hajj, or pilgrimage, to Mecca, and stayed there for a period of over 2 months. He was searching within him, cutting himself off from his position of power, cleansing his soul from all traces of vanity, because he knows the words of the Prophet, peace be upon him, whosoever has in his heart even an atom of pride, he will not enter paradise. He was worried for himself, so he went on pilgrimage to Mecca so he could shed his position. After Hajj, he went to Jerusalem, where he spent several days and nights. He said, I went to the Aqsa Mosque and saw within its 360 circles of learning, and so I said, Islam is dead. 360 circles of learning in the Aqsa, and he says Islam is dead? So when they asked him how many there had been before, he replied, there had been 4,000 circles of learning. When he saw that those 4,000 had now become 360, he said, Islam is dead. He went and wrote a book concerned with the improvement of the self and working on its education, a book about the moral fortitude and proper behaviour. He titled it Ihya Ulum al-Din, the revival of religious sciences, and it discusses worship traditions, the ways of perdition and the ways to salvation, the love of God, the afflictions and the remedies of the heart. He wrote about the etiquette of prayer and how to make the essence of prayer part of one's daily life and actions, and various other matters relating to prayer, zakah and fasting. Following his stay in Jerusalem, he then went to Cairo, then Alexandria, and then back to Cairo, and then on a tour of the world to force his soul to become humbled, or to rebel against the vanity he developed in Baghdad, or rather may have developed. We don't know for sure if he did become vain. We know that he felt he'd become proud, and he wanted to ascend beyond this feeling that is born in the human psyche. He gave up every bit of wealth and station and power he had accrued in his journey from a hungry little boy who went to school so he could eat to being the head of a great institution of learning. He finally returned to Baghdad, but not to head the university once again, because he realized that if he did so, then he was in danger of becoming vain. So he opted to become a teacher in a Baghdadi mosque, discussing the improvement and cleansing of the spirit and the return to proper and decent behaviour from his book, The Revival of Religious Sciences. But the people of Baghdad would not leave the famous Imam al-Ghazali alone. Once again they thronged him, and again he was afraid that this attention would lead to his doom. So he up and leaves back to Tus, his original hometown in Iran, where he was born, where he teaches his relatives and other Muslims there at a mosque which remains now after his death, may God rest him. Before he died, something amusing happened to him. He walked into the Umayyad mosque in Damascus, dressed in what amounted to rags. Damascus was known as the home of the greatest of scholars and men of learning. The simple villager walks into the mosque and asks the scholars there about a matter, yet none of them could give him an answer. So Imam al-Ghazali came over and said, "Come, I will answer your questions for you." The man said, "What God may will. The greatest scholars that Damascus has to offer cannot figure it out, yet this simple man can answer me." But he called him over and asked him what his question was. And it was a doozy. And before we say it, we ask God to spare us and you such things. If a man is transfigured by God, is his wife considered a divorcee, or is she considered a widow? And the scholars, try as they might, could not answer which she should be. And so al-Ghazali, may God rest him, told him this: if he is transfigured into an object, then she is as a widow. But if he is transfigured into a beast, then the contract of marriage between him and between her is no longer existing. It's nullified. She is considered to be divorced. The scholars of Damascus heard this edict, and so they circled the man, asking him questions. Who was he? What was his story? Where was he from? Hoping to know him. They learned he was Al-Ghazali, may God be pleased with him, and learned that an answer does not come from memorizing books and works by written or from hard work, but is a blessing from the Almighty. So the scholars of Damascus pleaded with him to sit with them so they could learn and benefit from his wisdom. And bear in mind that these men of learning were not envious at all, but were unified by this love of learning. And this is something I beg you all to remember. Any of you who've chosen to become preachers and advocates, if you should hear of a scholar or a preacher who has become renowned and to whom people flock in their multitudes to learn and benefit from, let not the spark of envy enter your hearts. Instead, you should pray to God to give him fortitude. I make this prayer and hope you'll join me with saying Amen. O God, bless the preachers of Islam with fortitude, and do not allow divisions between Muslims called by the preachers, for you are all powerful. Look at the scholars of Damascus who, when they met a man who gave an answer that they knew for a fact came from no book but from the Almighty himself, they pleaded with Al-Ghazali to sit with them every day and teach them about jurisprudence. They wanted to learn. This man was trying to avoid vanity. He was trying to find salvation in the eyes of God. So he said, God willing. So they thought that they would start the next day. But when night came, he snuck out of Damascus and journeyed back to his hometown of Tus, fleeing for the sake of his salvation. Someone might argue that he withheld knowledge from others. Not at all. We can't accuse him of withholding knowledge. He didn't withhold knowledge. Not at all. In matters of jurisprudence, he wrote more than 230 books for us to learn from, and they still exist now to this very present day. This man is remembered. But Imam al-Ghazali knew his own self, and he was afraid that if he were to sit down and teach those students, he might be afflicted by the disease of vanity. So he revolted against his own pride and vanity and adopted to die a simple and poor man in his hometown of Tus in Iran, where his tomb and his shrine still stand to this day. We ask God to bless us as he did him. I say to you Muslims, young and old, we must all recognize within ourselves those habits and those behaviors. They may lead us one day to damnation. Rebel against them today. If you find within yourself some envy, or find jealousy or loathing for others, or pride in yourself and condescension to others, then rebel against it today, before it leads you astray and sends you to hell. Make that change now. Do it today, and avoid going to hell. Look at Imam al-Ghazali, this lost and hungry orphan boy. He didn't have enough money to eat, and he went to school so that he wouldn't starve. He became the head of the school of Nitham al-Mulk with unlimited resources, and yet, despite all of that, he learned from going from one extreme to the other. That vanity and pride, if left unchecked to control his heart and mind and behavior, would bring down the wrath of God upon him. He gave all of that up so that he could have a better life. I'm not in any way telling you to go out of your position or life or status, but I am inviting you to do just as Imam al-Ghazali once did. To monitor yourself and your behavior, and if you find the whispering of the devil, or even the baser human instincts at times, then rebel against those actions, just as Imam al-Ghazali did against his, may God be pleased with him. Fight against that behavior that's the devil's handiwork, and it dooms you to hell. But when Imam al-Ghazali, in the process of monitoring himself, did not withhold knowledge, he wrote down and compiled it. I advise you to grab his book, The Revival of Religious Sciences, and have a read of it. You'll see how amazing it is. You'll feel that you're listening to a man who's alive and talking in our present day. Read his book Al-Albayn fi Usul al-Din and see how Al-Ghazali lays out the principles of Islamic law. Oh, God bless us with the knowledge of these great Imams, and make us among those who revolt against their baser instincts and desires, so that we can gain salvation. Lo, you are all capable. Until we meet again, I bid you Godspeed, and peace be upon you, and God's mercy and his blessings. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.